Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, Expedited runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and Designated Pilot Examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm fantastic. More than anything, I love when we have big guests, and if we don't call this person a big guest, we would be lying. We welcome to the show today Robert Sumwalt, the most recent chairman of the NTSB. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Bobby, thanks. Wally, thank you all for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. I just want to tell everybody a little bit about how we had this chance meeting. I happened to be flying a flight from Houston to Washington many years ago, and I was the airplane had not arrived at the gate yet, and I was standing by the window waiting for the airplane to get there, and a gentleman came up and struck up a conversation with me. He introduced himself, and as yourself, I mean, we are talking about you. He said, "Hi, I'm Robert Sumwalt." He said, "I'm with the NTSB," and we started talking airplanes. We started talking 737s and systems, and it became very apparent really quick that the gentleman I was talking to really knew his stuff, because he was asking me some questions that were deep down in the weeds on the intricacies of a 737. And as the airplane got there and I needed to go to work and actually get on the airplane and start pre-flighting, I asked Robert, I said, "Well, what do you do with the NTSB?" And I expected him to say, "I'm an accident investigator." That's kind of what I sensed. And he said, I'm a board member." And I went, "Wow, okay." And I went and got on the airplane, and I was telling my first officer, I said, "We've got a NTSB board member that's about to be on our flight. I just talked to the guy for 15 minutes, and I says, the NTSB is, it's not like there's 500 board members. I mean, this is, NTSB board members is a big deal." And so we had some communications back and forth. And then a few years later, I happened to be reading the news, and I read where President Trump had appointed Robert as chairman of the NTSB. So I sent him an email and congratulated him, and I believe the email that I sent to him was on a Friday night, and within about 20 minutes I had a response back from him, thanking me for my congratulatory email. And so I've followed your career. I've watched you on a lot of videos and read a lot of literature about your career. And so then when we started the podcast, Bobby and I were talking about guests, and I said, here's a stretch, but I'll reach out to Robert Sumwalt. And then I saw your retirement, and so here we are. So, Robert, why don't you just give us a little brief, 3-5 minute synopsis of your career? How do you go from being a high school kid to becoming chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board?
Wally, that's a great question. I've been wondering the same thing for a number of years. So I've been extremely fortunate. You're right. I did start flying in high school. By the time I had graduated from high school, I had my private, and then, of course, went to college a few months later, and I marched into the Dean of Students' office after I'd been at the university for just about 3 weeks, and explained to him why we needed a flying club. And then he sat down and proceeded to tell me all the reasons why that was not going to happen. And on the way out, and by the way, this was the University of South Carolina, and on the way out, I said, "Gosh, I just thought since Clemson had a flying club since 1928, I thought South Carolina needed one." And he said, "Sit back down, young man." And within about 5 months, we had our first airplane. For those who are not that aware, as you can imagine, having 2 state-supported schools in a tiny state, there's quite a rivalry between those two between those colleges. Unfortunately, Clemson is the one with the football team.
The question is, did Clemson really have a flying club?
Well, as a 17-year-old, I was probably known to exaggerate things a little bit, but to the best of my knowledge, I think they did.
So high school, what's next? I mean, what were you became a pilot, of course. What's next in the career that led you to the NTSB?
Yeah, I did, of course, fly all through college, and I was hired by the university to be their pilot when they bought a brand new Piper Navajo Chieftain in 1979. I had not finished school yet, but I was doing school and flying full-time for the university. I flew there for 2 years, and then in February of 81 got hired by Piedmont Airlines, which of course got bought by US Airways. And then that's where I ended my career in 2004. Ran a little Fortune 500 flight department here in South Carolina. And then in 06, President George W. Bush, another great Texas name there, appointed me to be a board member and vice chairman of the NTSB. I was there for 15 years, appointed by President Bush, reappointed by President Obama, reappointed by President Trump, and then named as the chairman of the agency. So I've really, really had a blessed career.
That's awesome. I think we all think of the NTSB as this organization that touches aviation, but one we really don't want to ever talk to or ever be a part of a conversation with. What do you think pilots should be thinking about the NTSB, or how we interact with the NTSB that we don't think about or don't know about? Like what should we think of the organization?
You're right, Bobby. Part of the story is that when I was in college, I did not really like studying calculus, so I would go to the government documents library and read NTSB accident reports. I was always interested in the NTSB, but you're right. I think a lot of people don't understand exactly what the board's role is, and the NTSB is an accident investigation agency. They're not a regulatory agency. Of course, that's what the FAA does. But really, that's what the board does, or the agency does, is that they investigate transportation accidents, all modes of transportation. They determine probable cause and then issue safety recommendations. The whole idea behind the NTSB is really to improve safety. They don't have a hammer. They're not out to slam pilots, or they can't suspend pilot certificates. The FAA can. But our role, and I say I've got to get my tense right. Of course, I'm no longer part of it, but it's after 15 years of NTSB employment, I still call it we and our and things like that. So forgive me for getting those pronouns wrong. But really, it's a great little agency, 400 employees, 5 board members appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and just a wonderful, wonderful agency and a great group of federal employees who love what they do.
We talked a little bit about before we started recording. We talked a little bit about Sully and the role of that, the role that might have been portrayed between the NTSB and the pilots, and that they were out to get them and maybe didn't see eye to eye with some other organizations. Good movie, but it was a movie. You were part of that experience in real time. Tell us a little bit about your interactions with the whole court hearing and everything that went on with that accident.
Yeah. I've known Sully since around 1991. We both flew for the same airline and have known him for a very long time. So when I learned that he was the pilot of that airplane, US Air Cactus 1549, it didn't surprise me that it was done well. I learned, his name that night, but the movie was a good movie. Parts of it were extremely accurate. I understand that the production company bought 2 old Airbus A320s, bought them out of the desert, and actually wanted to submerge them into a lake or something to increase the realism instead of just doing it by computer animation or something. But when it did come to the part about how the NTSB handle things, that was not true at all. We never interrogated Sully. I did chair the public hearing, the investigative hearing. I chaired it, so I know how it went. It's on YouTube. People can search it on YouTube and see the 1 hour that he was actually on the stand, and it was fairly benign. In fact, I praised Sully for his professionalism, and they acted like we took him back behind the shed there and whipped him with rubber hoses. Of course, the part about the simulations being conducted in France and being telemetered or broadcast live into the hearing room, that was not true. There had been tests in Toulouse where our investigators did go there and run simulations, but and I'm not even sure that Sully was the one that suggested, why don't you add another 30 seconds for the surprise factor. But at the end, I think the NTSB did a very good job with the investigation. I think we got it right. And the main objective is again, to learn from it so that these things won't happen again.
That was going to be my follow-up question, was did he really suggest that, or was that something that was omitted? But I do think as a patron of the movie, that was the way they portrayed that was a very interesting part of the movie, where it almost seemed to clear his name when he had that idea. But gosh, hopefully I'm never in an incident of any sort, but I do think that it would take me a few minutes to get my bearings and figure out what's going on for sure.
Absolutely. And by the way, just personally, I'll say, and even the investigative staff and the board members really feel like Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Skiles did an excellent job under extraordinary circumstances. And so we don't want to take anything away from what they did. They did a wonderful job, as did the flight attendants, in being able to help get all of those occupants off the airplane safely.
Yeah, amazing story. It's probably unlikely that could happen and not more people get hurt or perish in something like that. So obviously win-win for everybody, it seems like, for sure. And I'm sure on the news, when you were the chairman, you saw something like that. You might have seen it in real time before you actually got the call to come investigate it as part of the NTSB. We just recently had Tammy Jo Schultz on the show, and she was involved in one of those big incidents, and that probably was heard about in real time even before she's on the ground. What's in your mind as the chairman when you're seeing something like that in real time? I guess it's work mode. It's go time for sure.
It certainly is. I was in the office on the day that the Southwest Airlines had their unfortunate event and landed at Philadelphia. And yes, we were able to turn on the TV and see the airplane sitting on the tarmac, and knowing that I was on call and knowing that we were going to be headed to Philadelphia shortly. So that was always an adrenaline rush when you're watching something on TV and you're scrambling to be able to get to the airport so you can go and be where the action is.
And there's probably more we don't see on TV like that your teams in the past worked on and worked for. Do you have some statistics you can share from a GA perspective, or any kind of insights that would make the aviators listening to this podcast more safe or better pilots? I'm sure you have tons of things, but I guess in my mind, I'm thinking statistics. Where's the point of most common cause of accident or where people get hurt that you might be able to share with us, Robert?
Yes. Loss of control in general aviation, loss of control in flight is the most frequently cited factor in a fatal general aviation accident. I think about 48% of the fatalities in general aviation are a result of loss of control accidents. So, that's an area there where we can really, if you look at the big bar charts, that's the biggest bar chart in terms of cause factors. And so if we can really drive that down, then we'll do a significant job of improving general aviation safety overall.
And I don't want to, you might not know the numbers by heart, but is out of that 48%, is 60% of that IMC related, or is there a number of that loss of control that is in the clouds versus on VFR conditions?
I'm sure that we can find those figures. I don't have them right in front of me. And I'll tell you, I want to put in a pitch for the Air Safety Institute's Nall report. I think probably most of your listeners are well aware of the Nall report that's put out by AOPA Air Safety Institute. They really do a good job of slicing and dicing the reports that the NTSB comes out with. And so I think that'd be a great point of interest for your listeners.
Robert, one of our guests that we've had on the show is a gentleman by the name of Paul Craig, who wrote a book called, a couple of volumes, I guess, of a book called The Killing Zone, where he talks about, he actually gets in and really analyzes a lot of the NTSB statistics. And for our listeners out there who have not gotten into the NTSB website and looked at the statistics, there's some amazing things on there. You can go in and you can, if you want to look at every crash of a Cessna 172 that happened in the state of Texas while conducting flight instruction, you can do that, and it will come up, and you can just sift through everything. I'm kind of a music guy myself, so I Google the date of the Leonard Skinner crash, and then I go in and I look at the NTSB website, and you can pull up the accident report on the crash of that. So there's just so much there that you can learn, and it's just factual. The information on the website it just tells you the facts, and there, if it's closed out, there is probable cause, and it's probable, but it's what we think happened. But there's just so much there.
Well, I did not know that he had that website, but I just turned around to look on my bookshelf, and I know I do have that his book, The Killing Zone, and I was looking for it, and things have been in disarray since I've moved back to South Carolina, so I can't find anything now. But that book is around here, and I'll also say that the NTSB has a new search capability on their website, and it's called the Carol Query, CAROL, just like the name, and it stands for something, case analysis, something. But it was really named for a lady named Carol that worked for the NTSB, that anytime somebody wanted to get data, they would call Carol, and Carol would find it. So when they retired and they were putting up this new search tool, they, of course, named it. Well, of course, nobody would ever name a search tool for a person, but it does have some, some official name. Right. Carol was so good to work with.
Well, we'll definitely put both of those resources, the Nall report and the Carol query, in the show notes so people can use those tools. Robert, a question that I have that I'm sure people would like to know the answer to is, what is the cause for taking the final report of an accident to get to final from the NTSB? Is it just the data? What takes a year or two for the final report to come out?
Well, that's a great question, and certainly one that I was trying to learn the answer for as chairman, and change it and improve it. Back in a couple of decades ago, I remember there was a crash that happened in Hibbing, Minnesota in December, and the final report for that was out the following April or May it was. So 6 months. As we all remember, or many students may not remember, but the 737 Air Florida crashed into the 14th Street Bridge and ended up in the Potomac and killed a number of people. And in January of '82, the final report was done in August. And I'm sure that was a very complex investigation. The aircraft had to be fished out of the Potomac So over time, yes, the reports have taken longer, a lot longer in many cases than I believe I was comfortable with. So we tried to go through and take a very detailed, sort of a lean Six Sigma approach to looking for our processes, to understand our processes, and improve that. The results of that won't be shown for a couple of years because you've got to kind of work through a backlog. But yes, that was very much a priority of mine while I was chairman of the NTSB, was to improve the timeliness of those reports. I think there's a fear of getting something wrong, so the staff wants to be very analytical. But it was also learned that sometimes if you had an airplane run out of fuel and the fuel tanks were completely empty, maybe the investigator might insist on doing an engine teardown. Why do we need to do an engine teardown if the fuel tanks, if there wasn't enough fuel in the airplane and the fuel tanks ran dry? And so we've tried to scope the investigations. If this is a fuel exhaustion, what do we need to look at here? To understand what happened there. So our guys and our men and women of the NTSB are very dedicated. They love their job. They're very passionate about it, but they want to be sometimes more thorough than is absolutely necessary to really determine the probable cause and the factors that can prevent it in the future. I don't fault them for that, but I think that there needs to be a greater emphasis on getting those reports out in a timely manner without sacrificing quality.
No doubt, and I understand all that. I think I guess from my seat, and not an NTSB investigator, but I would think, surely maybe not an airliner, but a GA, thinking more from a GA perspective, do they know 85% of it on the first day? I mean, I would assume they do, and the rest is the analytical detailedness of it. Or am I just speculating the impossible, that they don't start from the impact zone and think, okay, this is what happened? They really try and separate themselves and start from scratch.
I don't know exactly how to answer that. I do suspect that there are many cases that we can probably say, here's what happened very early. I went to a UPS A300 crash in Birmingham. It was in 2013. So we're coming up on the anniversary date of that crash very soon. In fact, by the time this airs, the anniversary will already have occurred, and it was obvious that the airplane had crashed into the ground, a CFIT accident. But the real question is why, and that's what took a little bit over a year to be able to do the analysis and then present it to the board. We did that one in 13 months. Actually, it was the accident happened on August the 14th, and I think it was presented to the board on something like September the 10th or something like that of the following year. Again, we might know what happened real early. Again, the devil is in the details, and that's drilling down to understand why it happened.
Yeah, and unfortunately, probably for me, I watch a lot of the Air Disasters TV show, and I'm watching these things that they've replayed and have already been investigated, thinking they're probably more cut and dry than they really ever are. So I'm definitely not asking for expedited reports. I'm just curious on how that process really works and what causes some of that. You mentioned your efforts to improve those, prove the time and other things. I guess I'm curious, what were maybe the top 5 things you wished to accomplish in the last couple of years that maybe we'll see in the future that you did work on that we're not aware of yet?
Well, we worked on a number of things, things that the public can't necessarily see. we worked on making sure that our internal processes were buttoned down. We had investigative procedures, but they were scattered out all over different operations bulletins and unofficial policies, manuals that hadn't been updated in a long time. And of course, Wally and I both have airline experience, and we had a flight operations manual, and that was pretty much, or an aircraft operating manual, or a pilot's handbook, whatever it is you want to call it. And that's the way you intended to operate, and you made all efforts to operate that way. We had these policies and procedures, or maybe sometimes we didn't. So one of the things that we did was to pull together an investigative manual that would be a control document that would be every investigator would have on his or her iPads. It would be updated periodically as need be, and try to make things as standardized as possible. We did learn that we're not always standardized across the various modes of transportation in terms of our investigative processes. And in some cases, we're not even standardized within the mode. Like, for example, the Office of Aviation Safety, the board has different offices. Office of Aviation Safety, which obviously is the office that investigates airplane crashes. Then there's an Office of Marine Safety, and an Office of Highway Safety, and an Office of Rail, Pipeline, and Hazardous Materials. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the modal offices, the mode of transportation. So yeah, that was one of the things that I'm pleased we could get done, is try to standardize our internal procedures. That's one right there.
I guess Wally and I have talked about it leading up to this episode, or the chance to speak with you. And I think maybe the NTSB hasn't provided a lot of guidance on it, but we question the abbreviation of things that are still very hard for pilots to read, and if that'll ever change in the future. Like, we don't have a character problem like we used to maybe have on a dot matrix printer. Why are some NOTAMs so difficult to read in some cases, or the abbreviations so hard to find? I'm sure that's had to have been a reason for someone missing a NOTAM, or a cause of an accident at some point. Do you ever see the future of abbreviations and METARs and NOTAMs being easier to read?
Sure hope so. And as you may know, or some of your listeners may know, I was quoted in a board meeting as saying NOTAMs were a bunch of garbage. And I think I said something like they're written in in a language that only a computer programmer will understand. And I think that got a lot of people's attention there. But it is true that, as Wally and I know, that you probably don't use paper anymore, Wally, you're using an iPad. But you could spread out the amount of paper that an airline pilot would have before just going on a flight from Houston to Washington, and you'd probably have, oh my goodness, you could have at least 10 feet of paper. And so, and who has time to review every bit of that? So, try to figure out a way to make the information, the relevant information, put that in the eyes of the people that need it, and get it up there. I understand the FAA, they have to say that there's a 300-foot tower 7 miles from the airport that is unlighted. They've got to do that from a legal point of view to cover themselves. But you're planning a daylight trip into San Francisco, and you certainly hope you're not 300 feet high, 7 miles from the airport. So they've got to figure that out. And I think that with technology, I think it can be done, but it certainly needs to be done.
Robert, how many aviation accident investigators does the NTSB have?
Yeah, great question, Wally. The board itself, the agency itself has, as I mentioned, 400 employees. And of that, the Office of Aviation Safety has right at 120, somewhere right around that number. And
are they spread all over the country?
Yeah, they are. They certainly are. We have, there again, there's that pronoun issue. So the NTSB has 4 regional offices, an Eastern region, a Central region, and a Pacific Northwest region, and Alaska has its own region. So yes, the investigators are spread out across the country. Of course, our major accident investigators are domiciled in our headquarters in Washington. But yes, and people don't have to go into the office every day. We have a lot of telecommuters. If somebody is based in Seattle, which would be the officially domiciled in Seattle for the Western Pacific Regional Office, they could be living in Los Angeles because there are going to be accidents in Southern California. But from a reporting structure, that person would be officially assigned to the Seattle office. So yeah, people are all over, and certainly during the pandemic, we've learned that people can telecommute. I think that's going to be even more use of that across not only the NTSB but across all types of business domains.
Yeah, I know the Alaska has gotten a little bit of publicity in the last week or so with the latest accident up in Ketchikan. That kind of, I know that's there's been a couple of those, and it kind of hit home for me because I've actually taken one of those floatplane trips while on a cruise up there. So how many investigators are there in Alaska?
Yeah, I think about 5. I think that's about the number. And there have been several occasions where we've taken somebody from the lower 48 and sent them to Alaska for whatever reason, just to balance the workload. Alaska considers the summer months to be their busy season. And unfortunately, that is true. So occasionally somebody from the Denver office might end up going to Alaska to help out for a few weeks up there.
So, Robert, I guess all great insights. I'm sure I could ask a million questions. What, if we got about 10 minutes left, what would you want to tell a bunch of GA pilots that we should be doing to better our relationship with the NTSB or with aviation in general? You gave a couple of really good resources. We'll put those in the show notes. But what would your advice be after your tenure in aviation? What should we be doing or thinking?
The people that work at the NTSB are very friendly. You want to meet them in seminars and in social events. You don't want to meet them officially. So one of the factors that I've learned over the years that we see in accidents across each of the modes that we investigate is, frankly, people not following procedures. It could be an accident like in Bedford, Massachusetts, where the Gulfstream crew did not release the flight control lock before takeoff, and that did not work out well. There were 7 fatalities in that. We just had an accident in Idaho where a very noted test pilot lost his life in a single engine airplane right at takeoff. I've seen the video of it. I've said I won't speculate on accidents, which I really don't want to do, but the airplane right after takeoff goes up in a high nose high attitude, stalls, and comes back down to the ground nose first. People who have watched that have told me, wow, that sure looks like the flight control lock, the elevator lock, may have still been in. I don't know what the issue is. I'm not going to speculate on it, but usually we're going to find that, at least in many cases, somebody did not follow procedures. So follow procedures, do the checklist, and there's no excuse for not doing a checklist, in my opinion.
Boy, we've done shows dedicated to checklists. We've talked about it dozens of times. There's no question that it's the only way you can get everything done and get it done right. And you got to have some decision-making criteria in there too, to say this is going to be the reason I don't go, right? But man, it's really sad to hear somebody might not have removed a control lock or something like that. Wally, any wrap-up questions that you have for this distinguished guest?
No, Robert, one thing that Paul Craig talks about in his book is we can measure the accidents, but what we can't measure is the non-accidents. So, as advocates for aviation safety, we just have to go out there and keep plugging at it. And we're not gonna see a report that says, "Gee, by what you did, you prevented 18 accidents last year." We'll never know what that number is, but we know that the number is probably greater than zero. And, that's just what we have to strive for, I believe.
You're exactly right. We've got to strive for it. You'll remember, Wally, back in 1997 or something like that, after a series of airline accidents, the industry came together and they came up with the goal of zero. And people said that you can't reach zero. You're operating a very complex system, and the accidents will happen. Well, guess what? Since then, in the last major, I'm talking about a major airline, the last big smoking hole of a major airline in the United States on a passenger carrier airliner was November of 2001, when American Airlines A300 crashed after takeoff out of Kennedy. So that speaks volumes right there, that you can set a goal of zero, and by working very, very hard in everything that you do, not just one element, not just the pilots, but the maintenance system and everything else, you really can drive that rate down significantly. So you're right, Wally, you've got to have a goal of zero. Use your checklist, follow procedures, and generally that will keep you out of trouble.
Well, I can assure you this flight school's got a goal of zero, and we're going to we've got a long history so far of since our last medal was bent, and we're going to keep, no one's been hurt since I've been the owner, and we're going to keep doing everything we can to keep it at zero. Robert, I can't thank you enough for joining our show, and hopefully you'll enjoy retirement for a while, and maybe we can have you back on in a few months, and you can talk about what it's like in retirement.
Bobby, thank you so much for having me, Wally. Great to speak with you again. And I appreciate the conversation we had in the Houston airport. And I also think that was right before the board was going to deliberate the Asiana 214 crash that happened in San Francisco. I think that's when that was. So that conversation would have been probably around June of 2014 that we had that conversation. I wanted to know something about some of the flight control laws of the 737. That's what I think it was. I'm not totally sure that I remember that right.
It was, and I think I gave you some wrong information because I dug in the book on the way to Washington, and I was telling my first officer, I said, well, I think I told him something wrong. I need to fix this.
I don't think you told me anything wrong at all. So don't worry about that. And I'm from the NTSB, not the FAA. So it didn't matter one way or the other.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Robert.
Thanks again. And to all the listeners, hopefully enjoyed it. Check out the show notes on our website, behindtheprop.com. And as always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at behindtheprop.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.